think we're ready to start. Thank you.
All right, hello. Hello. How are you doing this afternoon? Great, lovely to see you all here. My name is Kamogelo, Molobye. Performer, choreographer, lecturer, pleased to meet you. So I am my mother's only child, and she is my only parent. And that's how this, I wouldn't call it a paper, but more conversation came up. When I applied for this conference, I went to her and I was like, I'm applying for a conference on feminism, and I'm a man, I'm a black man, I'm a black queer man, so there's quite a lot that we need to discuss. And a lot of the conversation that I'm going to share with you today, sort of a structured conversation, came up after having quite a lengthy conversation with her about sex and gender and sexuality and the constructions that are in society. And so it was important for her and me during this conversation to sort of contextualize and position ourselves and locate ourselves in this conversation. So I'll begin as such. I'll position myself. I'm a young man, I'm a young black man, I'm a young black gay man, and I'm a young black gay and queer man who is sometimes cisgender performing and presenting. I introduce myself as such because of the importance and nuance in each of the stated capacities that make up my identity and its perceived location and positionality in society. To be a young man is said to assume a particular kind of masculine gender performativity that is expected of me, that conforms to the ways in which society has historically, culturally and socially constructed and defined men as hegemonically masculine, that they ought to be strong, they ought to be dominating, and they ought to be patriarchal. To be a young black man, depending on one's own culture and background, is laden with cultural and traditional codes of performance of black maleness and masculinity within the household that continues the agenda of black male superiority as supported by some cultures and traditions. To be a young black gay male apparently is to be a deviant. It is to be at the beginnings of disrupting the social order of what it means to be a man, because according to social constructions, my love of people of the same sex and gender calls into question my manhood and my masculinity, and equates my manhood and masculinity according to womanhood and femininity, almost as though being a woman and being feminine is an insult in society. Added to that, being a young black gay queer man in South Africa comes with having to protect oneself through attaching or performing a particular kind of heteronormativity in order to protect yourself in particular spaces as it pertains to your gender and performativity. Now, this is a simple and yet nuanced idea because of its layeredness in terms of gender and performativity. By that, I mean that my performativity, both masculine and feminine, and its proximity to my feminine masculine perceptions, renders me unsafe and marginalizes people unsafe in certain spaces. It forces me to perform in order to pass. People that have watched Pose will understand. In order to pass, not be subject to various forms of violence, of interrogation, and the need to justify my presence in those particular spaces. And so my outward presence is what heteronormativity would deem acceptable and tolerable in certain spaces, in order for them to ease their discomfort with a queer person, a queer deviant in their space. And so to belong means that one has to perform a likeness to heteronormativity. Unfortunately, the same cannot be said for particular queer people or marginalized people that perform their overt femininity, or their femininity and masculinity at the same time, or cross-dressers, or transsexual people, or transgender people. And so there's an insistent precedence that those at the margins of heteronormativity need to carve out spaces of belonging for themselves, so long as those spaces do not inconvenience, disturb, and disrupt the heteronormative social order in society. It is important for me to position myself as such, as gay, as queer, as feminist. And though at times it might seem redundant, what I mean by this is that I'm a man who is romantically and sexually attracted to other men. But added to that, I'm of the belief that the binary constructs that male means masculine, feminine means, or female means feminine, confine what it means to exist and to belong in South Africa, in society in general. This is best articulated by an example who states that queer is something that is ultimately beyond gender, It is an attitude. It is a way of responding that begins in a place not concerned with or limited by notions of binary oppositions of male and female. And so being both queer and gay, in my case, speaks to my ability to radically love people of the same sex and sometimes gender as me, but to also hold a belief and attitude that gender representations and performance do not always need to be aligned with one sex, and that is okay. It is valid. In addition to that, being a feminist in continuous discovery, and queer, in my case again, arises from my manhood and masculinity being framed and nurtured and constructed through a matriarchal masculine lens, matriarchal masculine and feminine lens. And so my interest is in uncovering the ways in which black queer men position themselves with feminist thought and feminist philosophy, in order to find ways in which both queer theory and feminist theory can dismantle and disrupt the ways in which society has been constructed. Once we had this conversation with my mother, she was like, yo, young people love to be academics. It's a lot. What does all of this mean? And I realized that I also fell in the trap of becoming an academic feminist. That you read and read and you quote, but you can never truly identify or define what it means to be a feminist. But I resolved that that is also okay, because it is nuanced and complex to be a feminist. What she said to me, which resonated with me, was that feminism is a verb. It is an act of doing, specific to a context, to a location, to a culture and application, that liberates the marginalized and liberates women from systematic and structural oppressions and prejudices. And I was like, yes, mother. I'm a feminist after that, definitely I'm a feminist. But I position myself as a feminist in discovery, because I'm not going to make the error that I've always been intuitive about my feminist self. Right? There are moments where violence occurs and you look away. And there are moments where the gym and a guy says something and you remain silent. And it is in those moments of silence and looking away that you are contributing towards a patriarchal system. I'll go back towards my upbringing, that as a young man, I grew up without my father. I was raised in a family that is filled with matriarchs and is filled with female cousins. In my family, there's only 4 males, and everybody else is female. And so I began to realize and appreciate the influence that a female contribution towards my constructed self-identification and its manhood meant. I grew up to understand my manhood and myself within a masculine, feminine presenting self, in relation to the interactions of the females that raised me. And so the predetermined scripts that male means masculine and female means feminine were not ones that I grew up with, or perhaps it would be safe to say consistently grew up with. Right, in my family I was encouraged to, along with the females in my family, to be intellectual and tender and vulnerable, but to also be strong. And that there were no gender-specific roles that were imposed on us. Everybody cooked, everybody cleaned, everybody played with the same toys. However, those to me are what I would call soft gender constructions. Yeah, that we all cook and we all clean, and that we all share the same toys. However, the hard gender constructions continue to leak through the cracks, and they persisted, such as that females are not to explore their erotic selves, and you need to preserve yourself, otherwise you're going to be seen as in society. Yeah. Or that you need to prepare yourself for marriage, or that you need to prepare to take care of your spouse in the future. But those were not taught equally to everybody, because males were taught to become a man in order to provide for your family one day. And so this to me becomes a danger with regards to patriarchy, is that at times the matriarchs find ways in which they continue to encourage it, even when they try to dismantle it. However, having said that, it was important to sort of provide a context in how I grew up, because it normalized a holistic emotional presence that encouraged an understanding that my manhood and maleness is made up of both my masculine and feminine self, which is an understanding that masculinity, fragile masculinity, struggles to come to. It is further important to highlight that because it allows for the expression and exploration of one's own emotional intelligence through allowing us, males, to be able to feel hurt and pain and express such feelings through mediums such as crying, or talking, or laughing, or writing, things that are not currently encouraged to male children. And it is that form of expression that forms a foundation through emotional intelligence that deeply sensitizes men to the deeply internalized misogyny and patriarchy that is endorsed in society right now. And my upbringing and the discovery of my feminist self allowed me to come to the realization that manhood and masculinity and their culture or our cultured and social identities exist in a legacy of silence, a legacy of absence, and a legacy of unknowing. And that the relationship that men have with society is as familial strangers, whose vacant presence can be measured, however it cannot be grasped. And so we exist because we are, but we are not sure how to contribute to society, apart from the toxicity of masculinity and patriarchy and misogyny, which is deeply problematic. And so I began to think about what queer theory as a gay man can contribute towards this. Queer has often been interchangeably used to refer to gay people, lesbian people, bisexual, transgender, questioning. However, for me it goes beyond sexuality and sexual orientation. It is an attitude and an act of reflexivity. If queer was a statement to me, it would be summarized in a work by Alexander Moholi, titled, "What Don't You See When You Look at Me?" Because it speaks to its ability to invite society and its stakeholders to bring visibility to erasure as it pertains to gender and sexuality and gender performativity. Queer theory, queer thought, and feminist philosophy then challenges and mobilizes society to consider existence and experiences in radically new ways that disrupt how they've been perceived previously and conceived. It provides new possibilities outside of dominant narratives of being and belonging that force society to reflect on its own prejudices, misconceptions, rigidities, and violences. Thus, the queer and feminist project can be characterized as having both academic and political aims to resist classifications of norms that continue to oppress women and marginalized people such as gay people in society. Patrick E. Johnson states that the queer feminism is a project that seeks to interrogate notions of selfhood, of agency, and of experience. And so to me, it becomes an active movement that seeks to open up conversations about sex, about gender, about sexuality, outside of the fixed identities in order to explore how power operates in society. Earlier on, I spoke about having to perform likeness to heteronormativity in order to pass in society. And this is because as marginalized people, we have to find ways in which we navigate ourselves in spaces. Toxically masculine spaces, toxically patriarchal spaces, misogynistic spaces. And we see this in both micro and macro aggressions that entitles masculinity, patriarchy, toxic patriarchy, to surveil and police the bodies of women and queer people in an attempt to disapprove of them when they act out of line from hegemonic heteronormativity. And all of this is done in an attempt to correct the perceived misbehavior of women and queer people when they misbehave in society. In recent years, following many violences that marginalized people have gone through, particularly women, there have been talks and creations of safe spaces, which have been carved out by marginalized people to feel safe in those spaces, to de-stress, to laugh, and to express oneself and to strategize on how to go about challenging the power that already exists in society. Unfortunately, the status quo provides itself as such that these safe spaces have become spaces of overt violence and nuanced violence. On the one hand, there are safe spaces such as home, where there is a microaggression that develops from patriarchy through slut-shaming girl children for dressing provocatively. Because again, you need to preserve yourself. How you present yourself is how people receive you. Or promote statements such as boys will be boys. And so when a male child is violent, we promote that because they're expressing themselves as boys do, which is highly problematic. But there are also microaggressions in home safe spaces, because as it's become evident, family are the first perpetrators of violence through rape, and violence and abuse. But further than that, on the other hand, safe spaces outside of controlled environments result in catcalling, in name-calling, in gay bashing, in rape, in corrective rape, in defense classes, in pepper sprays, in electric teasers, in pocket knives, in share my location with my friends, share the Uber and Taxify driver information with your friends, in order for you to feel safe, and so on and so on and so forth. And so as marginalized people, we live in a state of anxiety, in a state of defense mechanism. And so we are always uncomfortable. In essence, safe spaces have become danger zones because we do not belong. And so to conclude, as I was talking with my mother, we could not come up with a definition of feminist thought, as though she provided one for me, which I accept, but that we came up with definitions to toxic patriarchy and hegemonic patriarchy. And it goes as such: boys will be boys, boys do not cry. Girls are obedient, submissive, and silent. That there's a bro code, and you protect each other as males, but you should have as exploitative conversations in locker rooms as possible. Through statements such as, I bought you a drink and so you're going to go home with me. That he only hits me when he's upset. I know him too well. He was just upset. What proof do you have that he or she raped you? The pull her down syndrome through slut shaming, catcalling, rape jokes, unprovoked nudes, body controlling, and victim blaming, through molestation, spiking of drinks, and raping, in addition to many other violent acts. On top of that, culture is also condoned, right? Through ngwana wa mosimane ke go tshameka, right? A male child's job is to play, however violently it is, however sexually it may be. Monna ke selepe wa dimisana. Whether or not your husband cheats, that is his job. He is meant to multiply. Mosadi o senang lenyalo ke lefetwa. A woman who is unmarried does not have dignity in society. Mosadi ke peo, sadi ke go tsala. A woman's job is only to give birth. And these are some of the ways in which patriarchy, whether intended or not, whether direct or indirect, is perpetuated in society. And I urge you and invite you to engage and converse with however way you might have contributed to it. Thank you.
Hello everybody, my name is Evaan. I'm from university, still known as Rhodes University. I'm a master's student, and today I'll be kind of representing my honours thesis. Through this paper, I investigate various cultural productions and media formats that have attempted to open up conversation about representation of the queer community within the South African context. I will look specifically at how YouTube has managed to help various queer youth validate and understand their sexual identity through the building of online communities. I will also investigate the reasons why online communities are needed in the post-apartheid South Africa, where discrimination based on sexuality and gender identity is prohibited by law, but still occurs and is not limited to places like high schools and POC communities. Finally, I will investigate my YouTube content creation in conversation with content created by Lelo Macheke, fellow content creator. My paper is titled Queer Black South African Representation, an analysis of YouTube as a platform of self-expression for the queer community. I was 2 years out of high school when I came out. Previously, the prospect of being out, and proudly so, seemed somewhat of a myth to me. In high school, I found myself stuck in a system of white, cisgendered, heterosexual patriarchy that did not allow me, a queer person of color, to open up about my struggles with my sexuality. The space that was my Anglo-Saxon all-boys high school was extremely problematic and provided no role models for those who did not relate with older white heterosexual males who were rugby and cricket obsessed. For me, this was extremely frustrating, and I was left with no understanding of my own sexuality and no role models to look up to. Not to mention that it was also extremely taxing and has had long-term effects on my mental health. Bradley Nash, David Kleitsch, and Ed Rosenberg, in their 2015 article, tell us that mental health is a huge problem for many queer teenagers and young adults, as they struggle with conflicting ideas of self-identity, self-image, and their own self-worth in a society that often rejects them based on their sexuality and gender identity. Nash, Rosenberg, and Kleitsch question whether social media can give rise to a form of community and positive influence for queer youth who do not only struggle with mental health as a result of exclusion, but also struggle with finding queer communities to be part of. For many queer youth, it is incredibly risky to meet up with other members of the queer community in person, as doing so would expose their identity can, and in some cases, will cause them physical harm. Many queer youths from rural upbringings tell stories that often include details of conservative beliefs, traditions that are oppressive, bigoted practices, and homophobic acts. As mentioned in Kevin Griseno's 2004 article, the spaces that queer people of color occupy daily are not safe, and it does not get better in the rural setting. Queer youth from such settings do not have the financial, social, or material capital to set up spaces where they can be safe. They also do not have access to spaces in the larger urban areas such as bars and clubs where they can meet and interact primarily with other members of the queer community. In American schools, extracurricular groups of queer students and supportive heterosexual students, otherwise known as allies, meet in what is referred to as a gay-straight alliance, or GSA. These groups meet regularly to take on various issues and provide a safe, supportive space for any student who may be questioning their sexuality or hopes to be supportive of a queer student. However, the existence of a GSA within a small town South African government school is highly unlikely because homosexuality and the existence of the queer community has been demonized within those spaces. For this reason, many queer students need to turn to the internet to understand, validate, appreciate, and come to terms with their sexuality. It is important to mention here that being able to access the internet and connect with the queer community online is a privilege. There are many people of color and many youths of color who do not have access to the internet. Some might argue that in today's society, queer youth do not need access to the internet to find other queer people to relate to, because media offers many queer celebrities, characters, and characters who appear on our television screens. Representation always brings up various issues, one of them being the implications of queer representation in the media and how those representations affect the opinions of those watching. One of the issues of queer representation in the media is that often the characters are assimilated so far into heterosexual culture that they do not come across as a member of the queer community until they explicitly announce their sexuality. While the idea that the queer community needs to present themselves in a certain or stereotypical way to be part of the community is problematic, a larger issue is at play here. The fact that so many characters in the media assimilate into heterosexual cultures and normalities through their presentation, gestures, languages, and dress is a huge problem. Not to say that there's a certain manner in which queer bodies need to act, however, there is no difference between that would be considered a heterosexual character and a queer character, which is not reflective of the real world. One of the biggest issues I had when I was growing up was finding queer characters like myself in the media. Characters who weren't stereotypically flamboyant and could be confident in their sexuality without having to compromise other parts of their being. This was difficult because the characters I could find were either too masculine to be relatable or were simply white men with whom I did not have much common ground. A participant from Brad Ferreira's 2016 research group, research that details the link between gay icons and coming out, expressed similar feelings towards the media. He says, and I quote, "There were no black males with whom I identified with." Close quote. As Ferreira discusses in his research results, many queer youth are grateful for the representation that already existed in the media, however, it is not enough. Recently, South Africa was rattled with the release of In the Head of a Balloon, a 2017 film that depicts depicts a closeted homosexual Xhosa man's journey to the mountain to take part in the initiation of Xhosa boys. The film itself was met with a great amount of anger from black men particularly, even before it was released. For many Xhosa men, there was a fear that the film would reveal secrets regarding the initiation process that Xhosa boys are required to go through to become men. However, the film intends to highlight the ill treatment of boys who attend the initiation process and identify as homosexual or present more femininely than the rest. This has led many of the film supporters to wonder if the so-called concerns are more of an attempt to put the film down because of the homophobic views that exist within black South African societies. Never attempts to challenge ideas of masculinity within the Xhosa community and the black South African society as a whole. The reaction to Never leaves me wondering whether South Africans, black South Africans particularly, are ready to talk about the issues of homophobia that exist within our pre-Muslim communities. For these reasons, many queer youth turn to the internet to find queer content that they can access without judgment. Larry Gross, in Lucas Sewell and Alexander Doe's 2013 article, regards the internet as a blessing for queer youth as it allows them to be connected to others and create their own representation. He says, and I quote, "New technology promises to free everyone, but especially queer youth, from the shackles of geography, especially in rural and prejudiced places." I first discovered YouTube around 2012. During this time, many YouTubers who are great advocates for the community today were not yet publicly part of the queer community. I think, for example, of YouTubers like Troy Sivan and Connor Franto at the time had not yet announced their homosexuality. Franto released a video in 2014 simply titled "Coming Out," where he publicly announced his homosexuality. It was this very video that prompted me to come up to my sister a few days after watching it. Watching Franto's video gave me the confidence to be honest about my own sexuality because his video had given me the final push I needed. It was videos like Franto's that helped me come up to my parents in 2015 and publicly on Facebook on the 14th of June 2016, a few days after the Pulse shooting in Orlando, America. Looking at my past, it is clear that I have benefited from having access to the internet, in particular to YouTube. During my first few years on YouTube, there were no queer YouTubers that I could find or knew of who resided in South Africa. However, through the internet, I was able to gain access to American YouTubers who helped me escape the confines of my heterosexual high school environment and rural small town. I was able to interact with new knowledge that helped me understand and accept my sexuality. For these reasons, YouTube has become a great part of my routine and became a great part of my routine and eventually a coping mechanism that helped me validate my own sexuality and life as a member of the queer community. Lelo Macheke, a 23-year-old journalist graduate from Rhodes University, a content creator who self-described as a suburban Zulu, a post-apartheid living black queer extraordinaire, is one of the main influences that led me to create my own YouTube channel and share my stories of growing up queer. When starting his channel, Macheke never explicitly announces his queerness, as he felt that what he had to share was framed in queerness, but not explicitly for the queer, and for that reason he felt that he did not need to come out on the internet. Macheke uses his queerness as a frame rather than a central narrative, and centers what he refers to as the human experience. This is evident in his backdrop, which consists of various black celebrities, including singers and actors who are considered icons within the queer community, but are also known for their charity and human rights work. For this reason, when I asked Macheke whether he felt that his channel helped queer youth, his answer in short was no. He explained that while the community appreciated these videos, there was very seldom any engagement beyond them sharing it. For Macheke, this was disappointing, as he hoped to start conversations with others about their experiences as queer bodies. This is ironic, as the very reason I interviewed and engaged him on the topics discussed within my paper is because of his videos. That being said, I related to Macheke here because I felt that my channel had not yet done what I intended it to do, inspire people to start conversations. It is clear that through the research presented in this paper that YouTube as a social media tool and a medium has helped many queer youths through the various struggles they face with having no access to a physical community that could validate their feelings. However, it is also clear that this has not been the case for South Africa as a whole. In South Africa, we still bear the scars of apartheid, which has made it difficult for queer people of color to gain access to the facilities that white queer bodies have access to. While it is true that YouTube is capable of creating access to online communities and online validation, this is only available to those who have constant high-quality internet connection at their disposal. Many queer people of color who live in South African townships do not have this luxury. Here it would be a good idea to investigate ways that queer communities in township areas connect with one another and manage to validate their existence, as their only access to popular culture would be through TV and other social media applications like Facebook and Instagram. That being said, queer communities in such areas are not completely removed from the rest of the world, and it is important to note my own privilege here, as these are mere assumptions made on my behalf based on the research presented. For those who have access to the internet, there is a whole world of queer-related content to discover. The internet is full to the brim of content because it is far easier to gain access to the internet than going out and finding people to relate to. That's why we have internet dating. For this very same reason, I decided to create the content I never found on YouTube. Looking at my own content, I've begun to wonder about the worth of my own channel, taking into consideration the conclusion above. What is the significance of my video content in the current South African climate, where those who might need to hear what I have to say can't access it, and those who can don't care for it? I question whether YouTube is the correct medium for South African audience. YouTube, according to Macheke, is a phase that has ended, and for that reason is no longer interesting. Much like other social media platforms, they exist merely to entertain us. He was also very adamant about me understanding that YouTube will not be the only point of reference when people look to find him online, because it can only offer so much. However, I must also ask myself why I chose YouTube. Was it because it was easy? And why do so many others choose it? Going into my research, I firmly believe that representation was all about seeing queerness within the media and about queer social capital. And while this is a large part of it, there is so much more to the queer community than those two things. Macheke makes a great point when he asks why it is that we only celebrate queer people within the arts. Where are the queer CEOs? He says, and I quote, we exist and it's important to see people, to see ourselves in those spaces. It is interesting to consider the fact that my research has led me to the conclusion that maybe online communities are not the right medium for a country like South Africa, where many queer youth of color do not have access to services like YouTube in the same way that white queer youth might. This conclusion leads me to consider, do we as a collective South African queer community overlook the ideas of expanding the queer community beyond the media, internet and the arts? There seems to be an understanding that we as queer people cannot be role models if we do not exist within the realm of the arts. What stops any queer body from becoming known as a business person who frames their work in queerness, or medical doctor who aims to work with the queer community and ensure the health of queer bodies is not overlooked? I have to conclude that it is because we expect queerness to be extravagant in its alternativeness to heterosexuality, and as a result never recognize those who are not extravagant in their existence or presentation as queer bodies. That being said, I feel that we as a community massively underestimate the power of the media, and might be overlooking avenues such as television in the South African context, because it has become so normalized but also overwhelmed with heterosexual storylines. As a queer community, it's up to us to replace those storylines with a variety of queer narratives that stretch from kids' television shows to adult dramas and soapies, so that the queer narrative does not only exist in conversation, but enters into the South African household and becomes normalized as more than a performance of flamboyance and a to-do that is whispered about in dark corners. In the end, it is our job as queer bodies to exist in such a way that spreads positivity for the queer community as a whole. We cannot rely on the select few who make it big to be activists for change and role models for queer youth. We need to ensure that our everyday tasks and lives are framed in queerness so that we can become role models for one another, that we can reach a time where it is not necessary for closeted queer youth to find representation and validation online, but rather that they are able to look around them and understand that their queerness is not something to be ashamed of.
Good evening, everyone. It's with great trepidation that I stand before you today. My name is Adaora Okpala. I'm a PhD candidate of English Literature at the Northwest University, Potchefstroom campus. And I've come here today to talk about the erasure of queer African women from African literature, specifically Nigerian literature. That's why I said I stand with great trepidation. And like Siseko already said in his disclaimer, I know nothing. I am an African feminist scholar who just recently began to delve into queer theory because of the apparent absence of African queer theorizations I find in relation to African feminism. Okay, so let's get into it. Okay, please how do I enlarge first? Yep. Okay, so the title of the abstract I sent in was Resisting Othering and Affirming Sexual Diversity, an African queer feminist reading of selected contemporary Nigerian women's writing. Now, to put this into contextualization, okay, under the Criminal Code of 1990, Nigeria provides for a 14-year prison sentence for homosexual acts involving either men or women. In January 2014, the Nigerian president at the time, Dr. Goodluck Jonathan, signed the Same-Sex Prohibition Act on the basis that same-sex relations were demonic and un-African. The law does not only ban same-sex marriages, but also slaps a 10-year prison term on anyone who registers, operates, or participates in gay clubs, societies, and organizations, or directly or indirectly makes public show of same-sex amorous relationships in Nigeria. It also calls for up to 14 years imprisonment for any Nigerian who marries a member of the same sex. Now, literary contextualization. For decades, queer Nigerians, lesbians, gays, bisexual, transgender, transsexual, and plus have been nearly absent in Nigerian literature. Their absence suggested something untruthful, that they did not exist. In the handful of fiction in which their existence was acknowledged, it was merely as a plot device, a strategy to make political points about rebellion and difference, a harsh focus that's perhaps derived from and allowed itself become another basis for the fallacy that queerness is un-African. This unprecedented diversification of the Nigerian literary scene in recent times, okay, by the fact that people can now write about queerness amidst the stifling enforcement of heteropatriarchal normativity is what Otosileze Obiyoung calls a small but seminal victory that should not be taken for granted. Now, I said it's a more recent occurrence that queerness, especially female or queer women, have been brought into literature in Nigeria. So some of the texts that have featured female characters or queer women will be Unoma as well as Sky High Flames, her edited collection entitled Blessed Body, The Secret Lives of Nigerian LGBT, and her Mountain the Moon, Queer Nigerian Poetry 2018, Lola Shoneyi's short story, Women in Her Season, 1997, and her novel, The Secret Lives of Baba Shegi's Wives. Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's short story collection, The Thing Around Your Neck, which features queer women in the stories on Monday of the Last Week and Jumping Monkey Hill. Chinelo Obaranta's Happiness Like Water, which has queer women in the short stories America and Grace, and her novel Under the Udala Trees 2015. More recently, we have Akwezi Emezi's Freshwater, which has a trans character who undergoes gender affirming surgery in the United States. And of course, we have also, very recently, published last year, the first anthology of queer women's narratives, entitled She Called Me Woman, edited by the dynamic trio of Shitra Nagarajan, Azira Muhammad, and Rafit Aliyu. Okay, this book, which is one of the books under my study, contains narratives of lived experiences of 25 queer women from across Nigeria. Also, we also have the first memoir documentary entitled Under the Rainbow, which is showing, well, will be premiering this month by Pamela Ade. So the two texts I'm looking at in my study for my PhD dissertation are Under the Udala Trees by Chinelo Obaranta, which is the first Nigerian novel that does not put queer women on the periphery of the narrative. It is about the Biafra War, but with the main character being a queer woman. And it also narrates the story of not just the primary character, but also different narratives of other queer women under the draconian patriarchal laws. And she published this on the first anniversary of the anti-gay law. So the anti-gay law went into action on January 2014, and she published this book exactly a year after. Okay, so the novel narrates the experiences of the Biafra War and its aftermath from a queer person's point of view. It's an unapologetic. Where did the on go? It's an unapologetic representation of the dynamics of African queer female presence and lived experiences. It explores the utilization of religion, most importantly, and culture, what we call It's Not Our Culture, as a patriarchal tool of dehumanizing queer people and enforcing erasure. Now, the second book is She Called Me Woman. It's the first Nigerian anthology of queer female experiences. And no, the stories in this book are not, it's not fiction, it's non-fiction. It's true stories collected by real queer women living in Nigeria. They are personal accounts and lived experiences of African and Nigerian queer women. It lays bare the visceral truth about being queer and female and existing in Africa. Now, this is a video, no, not now. So, I wrote, oh, there's another, okay, wow, nice. Okay, so, I think I prefer this one much better. Let's look at the sex baby. So, now let's get into the theoretical part of things. Okay? As Keguro Mashari 2015 aptly observes, African feminists have played a key role in mapping the changing meanings of sex, gender, and embodiment during colonial modernity. And although their writings do not directly invoke queer formulations, it tracks how bodies gain and lose meaning over time, how sex and sexuality become attached to bodies as they move through space, how power circulates and shifts as it genders and ungenders. In her article, Knowledge is Power, making a case for queer African scholarship, Stella Nyazi states that African feminists are sharply divided, with the bulk of the majority resistant to challenging heterosexism and homophobia in their praxis against patriarchy. Only a few radical African feminists address heteronormativity, while a much smaller corpus of individual queer African feminists incorporate non-essentialist, fluid, and dynamic understandings of gender that digress the fixed binary opposition of men and women, male and female. Now, one would ask, why this avoidance of queer discourse by African feminists? According to Amie, 1997, women in the academy and in African studies are too vulnerable to risk their careers on controversial topics. African women have argued that their feminism centers not on sexuality, but on the economics and politics of mere survival in present-day Africa. Similarly, Ashley Courier and Therese Mybrain George argue, I don't know if I pronounced it right, okay, argue that I quote, given the opprobrium towards homosexuality in some African nations, many scholars, with the exception of some in South Africa, have shied away from studying gender and sexual diversity. This observation is reiterated by Stella Nyazi, I love that woman, who argues that South Africa cannot be the only lens through which queer Africans from other 55 countries make meaning of our lives and realities. Yes. In queering queer Africa, Stella Nyazi states that to queer Africa, one must simultaneously reclaim Africa in its bold diversities and reinsert queerness through African modes of blending, bending, and breaking gender binaries and boundaries. From a literary perspective, this silence among African writers is not only eroding, as Lindsay Greensins notes. In this time, she says, a new cohort of writers, often referred to in Nigeria as the third generation, or those born after independence, have emerged and are beginning to tackle themes previously considered taboo in African literatures. Now, Amina Mama, a prominent African feminist theorist, probes the absence of studies about sexuality in African societies in which discussions about sexuality seem to be, to me, okay, she states, they seem to me to be more often repressed than liberated. Homophobia is rampant, lesbianism hardly enters public discussion. Now, it's no longer a secret that African feminist theorists, especially those from West Africa, shy away from discussing sexual diversity. Okay? Already? No. I'm taking tea time, I'm sorry. Speaking about the exclusionary politics of African feminist theorizations, Naomi Okpala, 2016, states that African womanism overtly rejects lesbianism. Swazilism subtly dismisses lesbian politics. Right? These feminisms place heterosexual women at the center of their feminist politics, with their emphasis on negotiation with and accommodation of heterosexual men, who could be husbands, fathers, brothers, and sons. Lesbian, bisexual, and transsexual women tend to be completely the first. Then she poses this very pertinent question. Does this mean that the minority of women for whom lesbianism is a political act, both to counter heteronormativity and to affirm new sexual identities, cannot be accommodated in African feminism and humanism? Okay? Now, when we theorize using African feminisms, we go to Swazilism, womanism, modernism. Now look at what some of the proponents say. Mary Molobye because it's a mode of self-expression that is completely strange to their worldview. Really. In Nigeria, where we have women-to-women marriages, although they try to shield it as an economic transaction, who knows what goes on behind the doors, right? Okay, similarly, the late Professor Omolara Leslie states that feminism is not a crime for any one kind of sexual orientation. And then she says what every other homophobic person says. I am not homophobic or heterosexist. I'm just saying, right? But I'm just saying that sexual practice in Africa tends to be private and considered private. The italics are in the original, that's the text. Okay, now that's almost the end. So in this book, I will briefly go through the text. This book, in the introduction of this book, right, it starts with, it is un-Nigerian. It's against our culture. It's not allowed by our religion. This thing isn't in us. It comes from over there. Maybe South Africa? I am an African, and there are some things I can never accept. That's the very introduction, the first sentences in the introduction of the text. Now, the editor states, this book is a response to these discussions. It aims to correct the three types of erasure we see in these conversations. The first is the erasure of queer people from the discussion about their own lives. Right? Everyone speaks for the queer except the square. Okay? Queer people are both hypervisible and invisible. Talked about, but missing from the center of the conversation. The voices and realities of millions of queer Nigerians, estimated to be more than the population of Lagos, are largely absent from the debate. The second type of erasure we tend to address in this book is the rewriting of the rich histories and cultural traditions of diverse sexualities and gender norms in the land now known as Nigeria. The third and final erasure is the state of denial or conscious forgetting that many people engage in of their own experiences and those of people they know. Those things you did in secondary school, in the boarding house, soupe, lovey-lovey, dovey-dovey. What's that? Is it youngness? Isn't that queerness? Okay. That unmarried uncle who lived with his friend, unmarried until he died. The young elder you buy from, and indeed the strong, powerful grandmother who had a wife to give her children, they hardly ever make it into private or public discourse. These erasures mean that our conversations are divorced from the fruits of our reality and lived experiences. Conversations about queerness frequently dehumanize and are dehumanizing. Queer people are seen as the absolute and dangerous other. That's why I spoke about resisting othering. Okay? They are predators set on converting others into their sins, corrupted by outside influences, or focused only on marriage. Adding to the confusion is a conflation of sexual orientation, the genders are known you're attracted to, gender identity, the genders are known with which you identify, and gender expression, ways in which you express your gender in a world where this is interpreted according to norms. Okay, our book focuses on queer women because they are often missing and outside the frame, even in conversations about queerness, which are often dominated as they are by queer men's experiences. Right, so this is it. It's an interesting read. I urge you all to buy it. It's available on Boots. Okay, so now let me go back to the video. Okay, Oh. And show. Yes. I have a video to show you guys. It's just one of the ladies in this book. She's the only one that agreed to reveal her identity because their identities were hidden because, yeah, you could be killed. And like Koleka Putuma says in one of her poems, I don't want to die with my legs open. And what again? Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's one. They'll rape you and kill you. And not because you're lesbian. Oh, because you don't like men. Okay. Where is it now? Oh, Fox. Fox. You closed it. Help. Okay, then, yeah. Please play. How do we get the volume up?
Check the actual community's volume.
Really now? No. Can we put the mic? Oh, okay. No. No, the separate women don't exist, right? It's on African.
Voices have been muted.
They come from over there. Oh, okay. While we are fiddling. Okay, so out in Africa, it can't play. It's a shame. Okay. You guys can always watch it. Just go to BBC World News and search for queer women in Nigeria. The video is there.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so out in Africa, same-sex desire in some sub-Saharan literatures and culture, Chantal Zabus, did I pronounce that name right? Zabus, right? Okay, describes contemporary women's writing of lesbianism and queerness as being in its evolutionary stages, with the writer starting off tentatively at first, and then with increased candor. So that is what we are seeing in Nigeria right now. The laws are there, culture, religion is there.
Queer people or queer women in Nigeria, there are. We shouldn't be written out of history, we exist.
Yeah.
Think we exist. She called me woman. Identify as a human being first. If anybody pushes, I say, fine, I'm a woman, a lady.
We really wanted to correct this false narrative that there are no queer people or queer women in Nigeria. There are. We shouldn't be written out of history, we exist.
Growing up as a lesbian, I mean, there was no community. I thought I was the only one that was a lesbian, you know, and now that I'm an adult, I want to give the opportunity to anybody who has, you know, means to read the book, that there are other lesbians living in Nigeria and they're not alone. If I can survive homophobia in Nigeria, then, I mean, what is cold compared to that?
It's not just about the genitalia, please. But let me start from the beginning.
We're very Nigerian, we're very African, we're very much a fabric of this society and this community.
As a trans woman living in Nigeria, it has been a bitter, sweet experience. I've had opportunities where I met with some people and I'm like, wow, beautiful, and they respect the gender identity, and we flow along. I've come across some people that come up to me and like, wow, is it not you? I knew you in so school. Better give your life to Christ. And the moment you got to I know what you're going to.
And the way she took it when I came up to her, it wasn't surprise. I was 28 at the time. It was kind of a bad time for me because I was going through the breakup with my ex. I came out to my family over social media. I sent a message on BBM to my mom and I told her I wanted her to be my girlfriend. And she asked me, are you two getting married? I was like, no, calm down, we're just dating. my mom's reaction was what it was, and my sister was like, yeah, we always knew, just get it over with.
Family has been something else. Religion comes in, God made you like this, and we're disgraced to the family. It's my birthday, and if I could say Jack Robinson, I was beaten by your brothers, Jacob, my brothers, kicking at me, beating at me, calling me names, demon possessed, and all sorts of. They used the big scissors and cut off my hair.
I had the responsibility of, firing someone, and the next thing she said, "You bloody lesbian." And it felt like my entire world was ending. And for the first time, I felt ashamed of who I was. I said I wasn't going to feel like that anymore. I was going to share my story.
So after the Same-Sex Marriage Prohibition Act law had passed, a lot of people were celebrating the fact that the law passed, and they were like, anyways, we don't know any gay or queer people, so it's fine. I was like, actually, no, you do. People just haven't said it, and I'm one of those.
I don't see why that law was actually created. I don't see who I'm loving or who I'm in a relationship with. I don't see it adding anything or subtracting your bank accounts. I've had very few relationships. I can count them. I believe since I'm a trans woman in Nigeria, and the other trans people in Nigeria, I believe that they
Should I stop it now?
Love, trans
There's not
people.
much left.
I try to make trans people know that, look, they should heal first. They should have a good self-esteem, self-image. Look into the mirror. Okay, who do you see? Try making adjustments, the way you talk, the way you act. Just heal first. Be happy with who you are.
Yes, finding myself, finding my friends, finding people that would understand when your heart is broken by another girl. Yes, I think that's something that really makes me happy. Because I decided to live my life the way I want, I have the opportunity to find myself.
These are our stories. If you really want to learn about us, or if you really want to talk about us, this is our lives and our realities.
Okay. Let's round up. 1 minute. Do I have 1 minute? Okay. So, in February, I was at the February lectures, which is like...
Morning, this is radio,
So, I was at the February lectures, and I have been thinking about an African intersectional queer feminist approach to reading the text, because I think it will be invaluable within the discourse and the highlighting of queer female erasure, institutionalized homophobia and transphobia, to fully understand the diversity of genders and sexualities along the axis of difference. African feminists and queer scholars must continue to talk about, for example, genders beyond binaries, sex, sexualities, bodies, erotics, emotions, race, indigeneity, pleasures, power, space, and places. It is pertinent to understand the way that issues of genders and sexualities intermingle with the various structures of heteronormative patriarchal power, specifically within the African socio-political context, and to push the boundaries of African feminist and queer intersectional geographical knowledges. Okay, so let me just round up. Enthusing hope for the future, as McLean and Tiffany Kaguro-Mugo aptly put it. We consider a feminist future to be where queer African women can firstly speak of their experiences and their desires without fear of persecution or violence, are protected by the law and criminal justice system, are able to seek out health care without fear of discrimination, have access to resources and knowledge that will improve the quality of their lives, can govern their own bodies and have autonomy over their sexuality, and can contribute to public life and social progress without making invisible their sexuality. It is only within this future that the rights of queer women protected on the international and national level as the conversations that fight erasure, exclusion, and denial of rights occur. That's from The Digital Age, A Feminist Future for Queer African Women. And that's the hope, same hope that's enthused at the end of both books, both Chinelo Baranta's book and this book, which ends with, our young people are going to continue to have direct interface with LGBT folks and find for themselves that they are just like everyone else and acknowledge that our lives and our rights are just as important as everyone's. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, colleagues. My name is Siseko Kumalo, formerly known as Kumalo. I am based at the University of Victoria, and I edit the Journal of Decolonizing Disciplines along with various other wonderful things in the academy. So, I don't know whether it's freaking bad luck or what it is. I suppose it is bad luck, but just as I sat down, my paper decided to get corrupted. However, I am familiar with the literature, so I am going to attempt to stitch together the work that I'm doing in the literature, and in that particular paper specifically. So, and I always disclaim this by, I always say to my students every time I step into a new class, I always say to them, I know nothing. So if I make no sense, forgive me. So this particular paper, Aligning the Ethical with Aesthetics, begins by a collaboration that I did last year with a colleague of mine, who were thinking about interrogating conceptions of manhood, culture, and sexual identity. It's a paper which appeared with image and text last year. It was a fantastic paper which began to sort of inspire some critical thinking from my side. Now you know what? Oh, there's this thing now, so I can't move around because I don't have a paper. I was thinking I could just move around. But in any case, I'll stay put. So it inspired thinking around healthy masculinities, right? And then of course, at the end of, or near towards the end of last year, actually, it's about a year and a month now. That we then experienced the untimely departure of an absolutely dear friend and colleague of mine, Siseko, was based at Rhodes University last year. And she begins to inspire this critical thinking in me of what does it mean to align the ethical with aesthetics, particularly within the realm of curating healthy masculinities, right? And this leads me down the path in interrogating conceptions of manhood, cultural identities and sexualities. Lidor and I define this concept of healthy masculinities, or we make a distinction between big manhood and small manhood, right? Small manhood is what we conceptualize as manhood proper, and manhood proper begins to do this work of consistent, sort of a consistent revisionist agenda, right? So manhood proper is this work of allowing itself to be opened up in many ways to critically reflecting on its actions and revising those actions in line with what is ethically, I suppose, with what is morally acceptable within society, right? And so we then use, Hannah Arendt's conception of action as legislation, right? So Hannah Arendt suggests or gives us the conceptual tool with which we can begin to think about this notion of sort of small manhood or manhood proper, and this revisionist agenda towards, I suppose, healthy masculinities, right? And I then begin to adopt this notion of, I suppose, action as legislation when I'm thinking about aligning the ethical with aesthetics, okay? And of course, when I'm thinking about aesthetics as well, in this particular paper, I'm inspired by the work of Lowe, when Lowe asks a critical question of what it is about masculinities that needs to change in order for masculinities to relate not only to themselves, but to the other in non-violent ways, right? And I suggest that Lowe here is in some ways echoing the work of Drusilla Cornell in 1995 in the publication in Hypatia, where Drusilla Cornell does this work of thinking through this notion of aligning the ethical with aesthetics, but not necessarily in the context of South Africa, not necessarily in the context of violent masculinities, right? She's just thinking about feminist philosophy, she's doing some really creative work and some really, really exciting stuff. And I begin to think about that because she then gives us this sort of, I suppose, the terminology with which to think about this, which is to say that, I suppose, aligning the ethical with aesthetics begins or portends this relationality with the other, whether they be black, male, queer, pink, purple, blue, or green, in a non-violent way, right? So there's a relational dialogic that is created, and it's the question of how is that dialogic mediated in non-violent ways, right? So in terms of that, then I propose a particular move for us, and this move is to suggest that in our conception of aesthetics, we do a bit of a shift, okay? Some of us, I know, are working in the sort of creative media spaces and art design. And I'm saying, let's go back. And in many ways, I do this in the paper where I go back to the Kantian conception of aesthetics, where he gives the critique of judgment, right? And that's the third book of Immanuel Kant that comes out in 1790, right? And Immanuel Kant basically begins to think through this concept of judgment from an aesthetic perspective. And I suggest, and maybe I'm reading the literature incorrectly here, and some of my philosophers, scholars, or colleagues will be able to correct me in this regard, but I think in terms of how I'm reading Immanuel Kant, in terms of what he's talking about when he's talking about judgment, he's talking about judgment as, he frames it, and of course, what's his face, Gadamer does some very interesting work here, wherein Gadamer sort of uses the Kantian conception of judgment to develop his particular conception of taste and judgment, right? And he says, even frames it, and he says that it is not that everybody will agree with our conception of the aesthetic, but that they should, right? And for me, that sparks on what we call it, the categorical imperative, right? And the categorical imperative speaks to that which is right in and of itself, outside of these qualifiers that might justify this which is right. So remember what I was doing earlier on, where I'm talking about aligning the ethical with aesthetics, where I think about the ethical in terms of relating to the other in non-violent ways. And now we're beginning to lay this foundational work, I suppose, in terms of aesthetics, by thinking about aesthetics as this notion of judgment seen through this idea of the categorical imperative as developed by Immanuel Kant. And then, of course, I suggest that what that begins to do for us is that it begins to surface aesthetics from the realm of beauty, which is a primary move that is fundamental in Gadamer's analysis, by the way, when he does that work on truth and method, right? So Gadamer suggests, I suppose, that we begin to lift the aesthetics, or begin to lift the category of aesthetics beyond just in terms of that which is, I suppose, aesthetically pleasing or beautiful, but rather to begin to see aesthetics or surface aesthetics into the realm of the political, right? So in many ways, we're beginning to function in terms of, and this is I suppose, the project then of aligning the ethical with aesthetics, is that these two meet together. Now, how the hell does this make sense in an African feminisms conversation in contemporary South Africa today? Now, the primary thing, so last year, as I said, I began with this idea of concerning Siseko untimely sort of leaving us from this earth as a result of sexual violence and sexual assault. Now, my project has been, I suppose, for the last, 8 months, 10 months or so, I'm not too certain. You think about these things and you put them on pause and they come back to you, type of thing. So my project has been thinking about what is it about masculinities in South Africa that needs to align with, or that needs to speak to this ethical alignment with aesthetics, right? And if you go back into, how am I doing for time? I'm doing 10 minutes. Flip. You can chew a person's ear off. Is that amazing? It doesn't even feel like 10 minutes or 12 minutes. Okay, cool. So, and again, I'm hoping that by the end of this whole entire talk, it's going to make sense, because as I say, my thing just, yes, fucked out. But in any case, so what I begin to think about is how do we do this work of curating, in many ways, healthy masculinities in South Africa, right? And if we go back into, I suppose, African feminisms, specifically as detailed by the likes of Okpala, she does some very fascinating work where she talks about tracing specifically black masculinity and how black masculinity imbibes characteristics of violent masculinities and how that is imbricated in history, okay? So the project here is to align the ethical with aesthetics, and we begin to surface the aesthetic into the ethical realm, which is the political, and these two ought to speak to each other in order for us to curate I suppose, healthy masculinities in South Africa. How does this project fit into this historical imbrication of black masculinity in South Africa, right? It starts off, I suggest, and of course, again, I'm following the I'm following the literature here in terms of where it's pointing me to, and the literature is pointing me to the fact that historically, black masculinities in South Africa have always been infantilized, right? So this infantilization, and this is in no way, by the way, to justify or attempt to sort of, I suppose, correct or defend problematic toxic masculinity, but black masculinity in South Africa has always sort of experienced this infantilization and subsequently wants to assert its power in spaces of intimacy, right? And it manifests in those toxic and violent ways. So in many ways, I'm suggesting a project of I suppose, excavating that history and beginning to ask ourselves, what is it about black masculinities that we can begin to, I suppose, speak to, talk to, that corrects that historical infantilization, right? And that historical infantilization that, by the way, does not empower itself by asserting itself over women in very, very negative and bad ways. Now, let's bring the conversation back to today. How is this manifesting contemporarily? And it's really interesting because this topic keeps on coming back at me and punching me in the frickin' face. Because the daughter of a very dear friend of mine from Rhodes University, Uyinene Mkwetyana, died last week at UCT. And I knew her mother very, very well 1,000 years ago. In fact, she was the one who helped me to come to terms with my own sexuality. She was my therapist at Rhodes University many, many moons ago. And you know, that for me was, I suppose, again, it revisits this question of what is it about this misalignment, this disjuncture between the ethical and aesthetics that allows black masculinities and masculinities in general to act out in the ways that they do in this country, right? And how do we begin to curate? And of course, you know, as a philosopher, the quick out that I will give you is to suggest that I'm not going to give us answers. I'm not going to give us answers. Mine is to surface the questions as a mode of trying to invite critical analyses that begin to think about these things in more systematic terms, because the conversation in many ways surfaces the problems that we are facing in South Africa, but I would dare proffer the suggestion that it doesn't necessarily go into teasing out how we begin to respond, and I suggest that's because we misdiagnose the problem. Right? We suggest that black masculinities or masculinities in general act out in the way that they act out today because of this and that, and we only trace it back to the contemporary, right? How do we begin to relate to historically black masculinities as we see colonial incursion playing itself out, the displacement of women within the gender economies, the complete disruption of gender economies on the African continent, thinking of course here about the work of Afīrming. How do we begin to think about those historical categories that lead us to the contemporary situation, clusterfuck, that we find ourselves confronted with today, right? And I suggest that it is in doing this excavatory historical work that we can begin to answer this question of aligning the ethical with aesthetics. Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you very much to all of you for a really interesting and different talks that give one a lot to think about as we leave. So thank you. First question to I don't know if I'm going to say queer men, but for the purposes of discussion. Thank you for your talks. But something that I've sort of been thinking about, particularly in the context of South Africa, with regards to queer identity, and I suppose there is a taking of that concept, and it's okay if we take it, let's say, whether it be from the US or Euro-America, and use it for, to understand where we are. I'm okay with that. But often what happens when it's contextualized within, let's say, South Africa, is that it often loses, a sense of radicalness that, it had, let's say, in the 1980s, 1970s, 1990s, in the American context, which was to say that what we conceive of as queer is going against the normative, whether it be marriage, whether it be the notion of monogamous relationships and how people are supposed to be in the world. It has, its historical roots. In fact, in as far as it goes within queer theory is that it's a radical departure from what we know as normative. So I'd like your reflections on what I see in South Africa as a deeply homonormative, structure that we live in which, I mean, it's okay, I'm a democrat at heart, so I believe that people should choose what they want to do for themselves, but at the same time, there is a normativity, every day on our media, people are getting married, getting engaged, or like Bisomizi or Musha, that is being used as what young queer men should aspire for, aspire for marriage, to be rich, to be of a certain class, and of course, one can see how social media, Instagram and stories have also played into that, in which queerness or to be gay in South Africa and to be accepted is, to be of a certain class in society, champagne darling, and to have a partner and get married, and it completely loses its radical nature, which is in fact a question what has been normalized and taken as what it means to be human, which is normally heteronormative. So I'd like to hear your views on where you think the gay or the queer society is, particularly as it pertains to gay men, like I say. And with regards to telling us what is happening in Nigeria, I think you know very much, as I said before, are extremely illuminating. But I wonder if you've reflected on this, and I don't know if it just be my perspective or or the House will share it, but there's something very hyper-visible about Nigeria and its issues with LGBTI, with LGBTI laws and so forth, more hyper-visible than, let's say, Cameroon or Ethiopia, or, we know more about, what's going on in Nigeria, and the writers are talking, and the activists are there. What accounts for that? You take, for instance, there's a prize called the Gerald Grant, literary prize, and like half of the participants or the writing winners were from Nigeria. It was that way this year, last year, the year before. When it comes to writing or even international publications, Nigeria seems to be leading, even as it has these laws that are homophobic. What accounts for this high visibility within a context of discrimination? Thank you.
All right. Speak to this one. All right. Mine is going to be very brief. So I'm going to answer you in two ways. One, my biggest question would be what is normativity, and that even normativity outside of homosexuality is still a very weird normativity, right? So queerness, even outside of African context, still assumes that. Right, to be queer and out means that you have to get married, you have to have kids, you adopt, you find segregate, right? It's still within structures of what normativity is within heterosexual structures itself. And so I question what it means to go normativity. Under what conditions are we evaluating or are we placing what normativity is? So I find that tricky to navigate. Yeah, I personally am not one for marriage for multiple reasons. I don't understand the performance of marriage. So yeah, I've never sort of found myself in a position like, oh, I want to one day get married because that's what a family looks like. Because I didn't grow up with a family looking like a nuclear family. And so I don't romanticize normativity according to a mother, a father, 2 kids, a dog, and a white picket fence. So yeah, I don't ascribe to normativity being a family in that sort of way. So yeah, that's something that I'm navigating. The second one is the notion of radicalness coming as a form of coming out. Personally, I don't subscribe to the notion of coming out because it is as though you are declaring yourself to heterosexuality, right? I am here and so I need to exist according to your standards. The only person I've ever come out to is my mother. And when I told her, I was like, I'm inviting you into my space. Whether or not you've got conflicts about my sexuality is something that you have to resolve yourself. And so to me, coming out is not necessarily coming out, but an inviting into, an inviting of people that you care for, that you love, that you radically love, right? Patrick S. Cheng describes love as a love so profound that it breaks all existing boundaries. And my relationship with my mother is so profound that I had to break the boundaries that she had, her expectations of me, that she's going to get a daughter-in-law, and maybe 2 or 3 kids, and a white picket fence somewhere. So for me, that is a radical act, that I had to allow her to adjust her expectations of normativity, heteronormativity that is imposed on me. And so it is to go, I'm not coming out to you, I'm inviting you into my space. Whether you want to enter into that space or not is up to you. And within an African context, the cultured Setswana context, to me that becomes a radical act. Because when my family is like, where's your girlfriend? I'm like, you've met my partner, and he still is my partner. So it becomes a constant, right, radical act. Because at some point they'll think you go, oh no, it was a gag. He's just my best friend. So the act of being and belonging and existing as a queer man in South Africa is a radical act in and of itself. And I don't subscribe to normativity according to Western thought. Another line,
Just to quickly, like in 2 lines answer Vanessa. I subscribe to respectability politics and advancing my career. That is what I am married to first and foremost. And heteronormativity gets one ahead from my side. Really, it's just my politics. My scholarship is radical, but my presented and performed politics are very heteronormative. I know it's a bit of a sort of a problematic position to hold, but I believe there was a paper presented yesterday that all your faiths are problematic. So count me as one.
I hope I understand your question correctly. But for me, in my experience, I grew up in what you refer to as the ideal family, with a mom and dad and a sister, 2 dogs, and a picket fence. And so for me, heterosexual marriage is romanticized. And I think that when we as queer people sort of mimic heterosexual relations, we make ourselves more palatable to society, because then we're not seen as people who sleep around or people who are just active sexually, because that is the other side of the coin, is that we as queer people are often seen as people who just walk around and want to sleep with every person we see. Because I think sexuality in this country and continent is related more to our genitalia and what we do with it than to the people we are and who we fall in love with. So yeah, I think there's like a romanticization of the idea of marriage and its relation to heterosexuality.
Susan, do you want to respond?
Okay, to answer your question about the hypervisibility, what I said, okay, when you exist, okay, and someone else tries to stifle your existence, what do you do? Hello?
You show that you are visible.
When you exist and someone tries to stifle your existence, tries to pronounce you dead whilst you're alive, what do?
They
are fighting. It's an act of resistance. Historically, we've had queerness in Nigerian societies, both in the Yoruba, Hausa, and Igbo cultures. Okay, it's been there. We don't have a name for queerness, but queerness has always existed. Okay, we know of uncles, like they said in the introduction, that never get married, live with their friends in the same house, right? Till they die. Okay, we know about women who share very strong bonds which transcends just friendship on the superficial level. But we don't have names for this. Okay, but in the Hausa culture, for instance, they have what they call Yandelda. You could always Google that. It's a gender non-conforming man. They cross-dress, and no one questions this. They actually find it entertaining. We had someone we called area scatter in the eastern Nigeria. You could also Google area scatter. He was a man, but a cross-dresser, or gender non-conforming, in fact, because he went on self-imposed exile, and when he came out, he decided just to dress like a woman. Right. We have female marriages, okay? if we watch this video a little bit, you will see where Chinelo Balanza also confirms that her grandmother married a woman. But we usually say it's for economic reasons and for preservation of the family lineage, for the woman to bear children, to maintain the family lineage. And if you said anything otherwise, you'll be attacked. But there's always been queerness. And they were never discriminated against. Suddenly, you bring this law, criminalizing the existence of people who don't bother you. Nigeria has 1,001 problems. How is a person's sexual identity or orientation government's problem? Right? So that is it. What these people are doing now on social, despite this strict laws, we have people, and it's interesting because digital media has, giving everyone a voice. Go to Instagram and see cross-dressers. We have Bobrisky, for instance. Last week he had his birthday, and the Lagos state government sent tones of policemen to disrupt the party. Is that like the most pressing problem you have? So they're just resisting. It's an act of resistance. Okay? And self-preservation, if I could ask.
Thank you. I'm sorry, we have to go. But thank you very much to all of you, and thank you very much to our speakers.